It happens in the spaces between words. You are speaking to someone, a friend, a colleague, perhaps a lover, and while their mouth forms the shapes of affection or agreement, your gut is screaming something entirely different. You feel a sudden cold drop in your stomach, a phantom weight pressing against your chest. You aren't just hearing their voice. You are feeling the precise vibration of their hidden resentment, their concealed anxiety, or their suppressed deceit. It washes over you like a physical wave, leaving you exhausted, irritable, and desperate to retreat into a dark room and stare at a blank wall for hours. You have likely told yourself that you are too emotional, or perhaps others have labeled you hypersensitive, neurotic, or difficult. You walk through the world feeling like you lack a layer of skin that everyone else seems to possess. Crowds drain you not because you are antisocial, but because the sheer volume of unspoken psychic data, the facial micro-expressions, the pheromonal shifts of stress, the collective shadow of the group floods your system until your neural circuitry blows a fuse. You think this is a defect. You view your sensitivity as a structural failure in your personality, a crack in the vessel that lets the chaos of the world leak in and drown you. Whatever you think this is, you are wrong. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, identified this state not as a pathology to be medicated away, but as a distinct evolutionary divergence, what you call anxiety or overthinking. Jung would recognize as a crude, unrefined form of archetypal recognition. You are not broken. You are a high-performance antenna trying to function in a world of static without an operating manual. You are suffering from what I call the uncalibrated aperture, and until you learn to close the lens, the light will continue to blind you. But if you learn to focus it, that same light becomes a laser. To understand why you feel this way, we must bridge the gap between Jung's mysticism and the cold, hard facts of modern neuroscience. Jung proposed that the human psyche is not a closed system. We are not isolated islands of consciousness. We are connected to a vast subterranean ocean he called the collective unconscious. Most people, let's call them the psychically robust, have a thick concrete floor separating their ego from this ocean. They are protected. They only feel their own emotions. They only think their own thoughts. They are stable, but they are also, in a way, blind. You, however, have a trapdoor in your floor, and it is stuck open. Neuroscience has finally caught up to what Jung saw in his patients a century ago. We now know that the human brain possesses a network of mirror neurons, cells that fire not only when we perform an action, but when we observe someone else performing it. In the average brain, these neurons allow for basic empathy, but in your brain, the system is hyperactive. You don't just observe another person's sadness, your brain simulates their neural state within your own physiology. When someone lies to you, your anterior insula, the region responsible for interoception and gut feelings, detects the mismatch between their words and their autonomic arousal before your conscious mind can even process the sentence. This creates a phenomenon I term somatic echoing. Your body is physically processing the trauma, rage, and desires of the people around you. You are carrying the unacknowledged shadows of your family, your workplace, and your society. Jung warned that emotion is contagious, describing a phenomenon known as participation mystique, where the subject cannot distinguish themselves from the object. This is your current hell. You are drowning in waters that do not belong to you, mistaking the pollution of others for your own sickness. The tragedy is that society tells you to toughen up. They tell you to build a thicker shell, but Jung would argue that trying to desensitize yourself is a crime against your own nature. It leads to neurosis, repression, and the fracturing of the self. The goal is not to stop feeling. The goal is to stop reacting blindly. The goal is to transition from a passive victim of psychic osmosis into an active observer of the human condition. Consider the evolutionary perspective. Why would nature preserve a trait that causes so much suffering? Why would evolution select for individuals who are so easily overwhelmed? The answer is simple. The tribe does not need more warriors, it has enough. It does not need more laborers, it needs sentinels. In the primal past, the member of the tribe who could smell the rain before the storm or sense the predator in the tall grass before it moved was the most valuable asset to survival. Your sensitivity is a sophisticated early warning system. The problem is that you are using a radar designed to detect tigers to navigate a dinner party, and the signal noise is deafening. Jung famously noted, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." For the sensitive individual, this burden is literal. You likely grew up in a household where you acted as the emotional regulator. You sensed when a parent was on the verge of an outburst, and you altered your behavior to diffuse the tension. You developed hyper-attunement as a survival strategy. You learned to read the room to stay safe. This forged your neural pathways into a state of chronic high alert, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline at the slightest shift in atmosphere. What was once a survival mechanism has now become a prison. You are trapped in a loop of scanning for danger where there is only social awkwardness. You are projecting the archetype of the devouring mother or the tyrannical father onto your boss or your partner, reacting to them with the intensity of a terrified child rather than a sovereign adult. Jung called this inflation, where the ego is possessed by an archetype. You are possessed by the archetype of the victim healer. But here is the turning point. Jung believed that the very thing that torments you is the key to your individuation, the process of becoming your true self. The sensitivity that makes you weak is the raw material for what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension of opposites and birth a new consciousness. You have the capacity to see the shadow that others deny. You have the capacity to perceive the truth behind the mask, the persona. If you stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to understand the data you are receiving, the dynamic shifts. You stop being a sponge and you start being a mirror. You stop absorbing the poison and you start analyzing its chemical composition. This requires a radical shift in perspective. It requires you to stop identifying with the feelings rushing through you. You must develop what I call dispassionate witness consciousness. To illustrate how this transformation works, how one moves from a fragile victim to a wielder of psychological power, we must look at a specific profile. Jung encountered many patients with this exact constitution. They came to him paralyzed by the world, convinced they were too soft for existence. Let us look at the case of a man we shall call the Absorber. The Absorber was a highly intelligent archivist, a man who spent his days organizing chaos into order. On paper, his life was structured, but internally he was a leaf in a hurricane. When Julian, let's give him a name, walked into a meeting where two colleagues had been arguing 5 minutes prior, he would physically recoil. The air in the room felt thick to him, viscous with their unspoken hostility. Even though they were smiling, Julian's heart rate would spike to 120 beats per minute. He would begin to stutter. He would suddenly feel an overwhelming sense of guilt, as if he were the one who had caused the conflict. By the time he arrived home, Julian was a husk. If his partner asked him a simple question, he would snap or worse, collapse into tears. He came to Jung believing he was going insane. He told Jung, "I am not myself, I am everyone else." Jung did not tell Julian to ignore these feelings. He didn't teach him breathing exercises to calm down. Instead, Jung identified that Julian was suffering from a lack of a psychic epidermis. In the alchemical traditions Jung studied, this is the vessel that has not yet been sealed. The chemical reaction is leaking out. Julian was experiencing projective identification in reverse. Instead of projecting his feelings onto others, he was allowing others to project their unwanted, unconscious debris into him. He was the trash can for the collective psyche of his office. This is the dangerous paradox of the sensitive type. Because you feel so deeply, people unconsciously sense that you are a vessel. They feel better after talking to you, not because you gave good advice, but because you literally metabolized their pain for them. You took their anxiety, processed it through your own nervous system, and gave them back calm. They left lighter. You were left heavy. You are performing unconscious alchemical transmutation, turning their lead into gold, but you are keeping the toxic byproducts in your own blood. To understand where you fall on this spectrum, we must classify the manifestations of this trait. Jungian analysis suggests that this sensitivity usually presents itself in 3 distinct phases of unconscious suffering before it can be turned into a weapon. The first phase is what I call the somatic sponge. At this stage, you do not even realize the emotions are not yours. You simply feel physical symptoms. You enter a crowded shopping mall and suddenly develop a migraine. You sit next to a depressed person on the bus and your stomach turns. Your body is reacting to the atmosphere because your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge the data. You treat these as medical issues: chronic fatigue, IBS, unexplained aches. You are medicating the symptom of a psychic invasion. The second phase is the emotional chameleon. This is where the loss of self occurs. You are so fluid, so open, that you involuntarily shapeshift to match the person you are with. If you are with a loud, aggressive person, you shrink or become strangely aggressive yourself. If you are with a victim, you become a savior. You have no solid I. You are defined entirely by the thou. Jung warned that this leads to a dissociation of the personality. You look in the mirror and don't know who is looking back because you have spent your entire day wearing other people's faces. The third and most dangerous phase is the shadow eater. This is the specific burden of the highly sensitive person who was raised in a chaotic or abusive environment. You have developed a specialized radar for the darkness in others. You don't just feel their surface emotions. You feel their repressed emotions. You know when someone is lying to themselves. You feel the rage behind the smile of the polite neighbor. You sense the grief your father never speaks of. This makes you incredibly dangerous to the egos of others. People often dislike you for no apparent reason. Why? Because you are looking at their shadow. You are seeing the things they are desperately trying to hide from themselves. Your very presence threatens their persona structure. When you look at them, they feel naked. So they attack you. They gaslight you. They call you crazy or too sensitive to discredit your perception. And because you are a shadow eater, you swallow their poison. You believe them. You think, maybe I am crazy, because the alternative, that you are the only one seeing the truth, is too terrifying to accept. But this ability to see the shadow is not a curse. It is the raw ore of your weapon. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You are already seeing the darkness, you just haven't learned how to stop it from infecting you. You are touching the radioactive material without a hazmat suit. The transition from victim to master begins with a single cold realization. Most of what you feel is not yours. You must develop the capacity for psychic triage. In modern neuroscience, this involves strengthening the connection between the amygdala, the alarm bell, and the prefrontal cortex, the executive center. You must learn to intercept the signal. When the wave of emotion hits you, that sudden drop, that flash of anger, you must freeze time. You must insert a wedge of consciousness between the sensation and your identification with it. Jung called this the development of the supraordinate personality. It is a vantage point above the ego. It is the watcher. The process of building this watcher requires you to start practicing the dissociative pausing technique. This is not clinical dissociation, which is a defense mechanism. This is strategic detachment. When you feel the influx of foreign emotion, you do not say, I am anxious. You say, there is anxiety in the field. Note the linguistic shift. You move from I am identity, to there is, observation. You objectify the emotion, you place it on a slide under a microscope. Once you separate your identity from the feeling, you can begin to ask the diagnostic questions that turn your sensitivity into a tactical advantage. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and you start asking, "What is this signal telling me about the environment?" Suddenly the anxiety is not a defect, it is data. That sudden exhaustion you feel around your new boss, that is not your lack of stamina, that is your radar picking up on his narcissistic energy vampire tendencies. That sudden rage you feel when talking to your mother, that is not your disrespect. That is you feeling her unexpressed resentment toward her own life, which she is projecting onto you. When you realize this, the dynamic flips. You are no longer the trash can. You are the archetypal diagnostician. You are seeing the secret architecture of human behavior that remains invisible to the psychically robust. They see the mask. You see the man. However, knowing this is not enough. You must learn to seal the vessel. You must learn to build the hermetic seal around your psyche. This is not a wall. Walls are brittle and can be broken. This is a semi-permeable membrane that you control. Jung spoke of the temenos, a sacred protected space where psychological work is done. You must carry a portable temenos with you. This begins with the physical management of your nervous system. You cannot do high-level psychic work if your biological hardware is fried. You must understand that your biology is more expensive to run than the average person's. Your brain consumes more glucose because it is processing 10 times the data. You need solitude like you need oxygen. Solitude is not a luxury for you, it is a decontamination chamber. It is where you scrub the psychic residue of the collective off your skin. If you deny yourself this withdrawal, you will succumb to what Jung termed abaissement du niveau mental, a lowering of the mental level, where your ego dissolves into the mass mind. You must respect the oscillation of your own energy. You breathe in the world and you must breathe it out in silence. Without this rhythm, you become toxic to yourself and useless to others. Once you have established this perimeter, once you have learned to differentiate between your emotion and the field emotion, and you have secured your sanctuary, you are ready to activate the weapon. You are ready to engage the shadow mirror effect. This is the offensive application of your sensitivity. In the past, when you felt the hidden aggression or the repressed grief of another person, you absorbed it. You tried to smooth it over, you tried to fix it. You played the role of the shock absorber. Now you do the opposite. You stop absorbing, you simply perceive and hold. Imagine you are in a negotiation or a confrontation with a manipulative partner. Your amygdala screams that they are angry even though they are speaking calmly. Your old instinct would be to placate them, to apologize, to scramble for safety. But you have engaged the supraordinate personality. You recognize the signal. There is aggression in the field. Instead of reacting, you do absolutely nothing. You hold your gaze. You keep your breathing rhythmic, controlling your vagal tone to suppress the flight response. You become a perfectly smooth, reflective surface. You refuse to take the bait of their projection. Do you know what happens when you refuse to accept a projection? It bounces back. When you do not absorb their hidden rage, it hits an invisible wall and returns to the sender with double the velocity. They suddenly become confused, stammering, or irrationally angry because their unconscious strategy to dump their shadow onto you has failed. By simply remaining present and unreactive, you force them to confront their own internal state. You are no longer the victim of their darkness, you are the illuminator of it. You have weaponized silence. You have turned your sensitivity into a psychic deflector shield. This is the power of the unspoken interrogation. Because you can read micro-expressions and sense shifts in cortisol levels, you know when someone is lying. You don't need to shout, "You're a liar." You simply pause. You look at them with that deep, penetrating recognition that only your type possesses. You let the silence stretch just a second too long. In that second, they know that you know. Their amygdala detects your lack of buy-in, and they begin to unravel. You have stripped them of their mask without speaking a word. This is the evolutionary function of your type. You are the tribe's truth teller. You are not designed to be the loud leader on the podium. You are the advisor in the shadows who knows which alliances are fake and which threats are real. In the corporate world, this manifests as strategic intuition. While your colleagues are focused on the spreadsheet data, you are reading the energy of the boardroom. You sense the hesitation in the CEO's voice that contradicts the optimistic numbers. You feel the shifting loyalty of a key stakeholder before they have sent the resignation email. For years, you suppressed this data because it wasn't rational, but modern neuroscience tells us that the enteric nervous system, the second brain in your gut, processes data at a speed and complexity that the conscious mind cannot comprehend. What you call a hunch is actually the result of your brain processing thousands of subtle cues, tone of voice, pupil dilation, posture, pheromones, and synthesizing them into a conclusion. Jung called this the intuitive function. It is not magic, it is high-speed pattern recognition. When you trust this function, you stop being blindsided by life. You see the betrayal coming 6 months in advance. You feel the layoff before the memo is written. You sense the hollowness of a relationship on the first date. The weapon is pre-cognitive evasion. You can sidestep disasters that crush the psychically robust because they are marching blindly into the trap while you felt the tremors in the ground miles away. But wielding this weapon requires a sacrifice. You must sacrifice the desire to be normal. You must sacrifice the need to be understood by those who lack your apparatus. You are asking a colorblind person to understand the shade of indigo. It is a futile expenditure of energy. You must accept a certain degree of archetypal estrangement. The seer is rarely the most popular member of the village. The one who sees the shadow is often feared because the shadow is what people are most afraid of in themselves. When you stop taking on their emotions, some people will leave your life. They will accuse you of having changed. They will say you have become cold or distant. This is a good sign. It means the parasitic bond has been broken. They liked you when you were their vessel. They dislike you now that you are a sovereign entity. Let them go. You are clearing the space for a higher form of connection. One based on conscious relation, not unconscious entanglement. You are moving toward what Jung called individuation, the ultimate goal of human life. Individuation is not about becoming happy, it is about becoming whole. It is the integration of the conscious and the unconscious. Your sensitivity is the bridge between these two worlds. You are the mediator. This journey requires you to adopt a new operating system for your daily life. You must implement the protocol of the Sentinel. First, you must ruthlessly curate your environment. If you are a sponge, you cannot live in a sewer and expect to stay clean. You must become elitist about who has access to your nervous system. This is not arrogance. It is biological necessity. You have a Ferrari engine. You cannot put low-grade fuel in it. You must surround yourself with people who have done their own shadow work, or at least those who possess basic emotional hygiene. Second, you must find a channel for the energy you perceive. Jung was clear. The creative fire which is not shaped becomes a wildfire that destroys. The intensity you feel must be transmuted into creation. Write, paint, build, solve complex problems. The energy you absorb from the collective is high voltage. If you do not ground it into a creative act, it will burn your circuits, manifesting as anxiety or autoimmune disease. You must become a transmuter. Third, you must study the darkness. Since you feel it anyway, you might as well understand it. Read psychology, study history, understand the mechanics of narcissism, of power, of groupthink. When you understand the mechanism of the behavior that triggers you, it loses its power to overwhelm you. It becomes a specimen. You move from horror to curiosity. Ah, I see he is acting out a classic compensation for an inferiority complex. Is a very different experience from Why is he attacking me? By applying these protocols, you slowly shift the polarity of your existence. You stop being the fragile leaf and become the wind. You realize that your sensitivity is actually a form of hyperconnectivity. Consider the state of the world today. We are living in an era of unprecedented dissociation. People are numb, distracted, severed from their instincts and from each other. In a world of numbness, feeling is a revolutionary act. In a world of blindness, sight is a superpower. The psychically robust are beginning to fail. Their concrete floors are cracking. The complexity of the modern world is too much for the rigid, repressed ego to handle. We are seeing a global mental health crisis because the old strategies of suppression are no longer working. The water is rising and they do not know how to swim. But you have been swimming your whole life. You know these waters. You know the dark currents. You know how to navigate the storm because you have internal storms every Tuesday before breakfast. The very traits that made you a misfit in the 20th century are making you a leader in the 21st. We are moving into the age of the intuitives. The brute force of the industrial age is over. The subtle, connective, empathetic intelligence of the information age is here. The machines can do the logic. The machines can do the math. But the machines cannot feel, they cannot sense the zeitgeist, they cannot read the room. Only you can do that. You are the prototype for the next stage of human consciousness. Jung believed that humanity was slowly evolving toward a state where the unconscious would become conscious, where the barrier between the two would thin. You are the early adopters of this thin barrier. It hurts because it is new. It hurts because the culture has not yet built the structures to support it, but do not mistake the growing pains for a death rattle. You are being forged. The heat you feel is the alchemical fire burning away the dross of the persona, leaving only the gold of the self. So the next time you feel that overwhelming wave of emotion, the next time the world feels too loud, too bright, too heavy, do not despair, do not wish it away. Stand your ground, breathe into the sensation, recognize it as the raw data of reality flooding into your system, activate the watcher, engage the reflection, use the weapon. You are not broken, you are simply the first of your kind to wake up. See you in the next dimension.